The following is a paid program that is paid for by AARP of Michigan.
If you know someone who is suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, you don't want to miss this program. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching Real Possibilities today. We're talking about brain health, Alzheimer's, dementia, and it's been said that either you know someone with dementia or you may have dementia, but it impacts everybody. It impacts our lives every day. And there's no one better to talk about what we can do, to talk about what's going on in the area of dementia than our own Dr. Counts. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Doctor.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Why don't you tell folks a little about your own credentials, because we're going to get into a lot of good information. We want to establish your credibility first.
Well,
so we didn't just pull you off the street.
This guy know what he's talking about, right? Well, no, I have been studying Alzheimer's disease and related dementias for about 30 years. I did my graduate work at Emory University. I did my postdoctoral in early career assistant professorship work at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. And then I was recruited to Michigan State in 2013. So I've been here 12 years, and it's been a real blessing to be at Michigan State and be able to watch the program, our Alzheimer's disease and dementia research program, expand and flourish and really be able to make some impact.
What have you learned? I mean, in the time from the beginning when you first started, what's changed? Any progress?
Yeah, well, a lot of progress. I think the thing that's important to remember about Alzheimer's disease is that it's what we call a multifactorial disease, right? So that makes therapy a really difficult problem to tackle because what we're coming to understand is that there's just not going to be a silver bullet, right? And so you're probably going to need a combinatorial therapy. We're starting to understand more about the genetics that are involved in the disease. We're starting to understand more about the risk factors that are involved in the disease. And so between a combination of maybe what we would call personalized medicine, right? So maybe the ultimate goal is to have a cocktail of different alternative therapies that you could have, but they're tailored to the individual, possibly depending on your genetic makeup. And then, like I mentioned, there are also risk factors that seem to be well established, and they are typically modifiable risk factors, meaning there are things you can do about them. So that's been a revelation as well.
And so there are different stages, right? I mean, people don't always start out with a full dementia. It seems as though there's progression. Right.
So I think the main difference between Alzheimer's disease and, say, for instance, sort of the second major cause of dementia, which is more like vascular dementia, is that, and that comes from like strokes that are sort of in the wrong part of the brain. They're in those cognitive regions, right? Or sort of some of those areas of the brain that are sending signals back and forth between different regions of the brain. So they just interrupt your thinking skills, right? But Alzheimer's disease, again, is a more slowly progressing disease. We now are coming to appreciate that it probably begins decades before symptoms. On the one hand, that tells you that your brain is very resilient and it's able to sort of reorganize and deal with the sort of mounting pathology. On the other hand, that makes detecting it harder, right? The early stages, because by the time people have symptoms, there's been a lot of sort of damage that's already occurred, right? So it's a more gradual onset, and it's mainly sort of short-term memory that you see impacted first, whereas, say, with vascular dementia, it's more of a rapid onset because suddenly, with a stroke, you have that cut off of blood supply to these a cluster of neurons in a cognitive brain region, and then so suddenly they all just sort of die off, and so the effects are more immediate. And a lot of times with the vascular dementia, what you see are early deficits more in executive function, like planning and making decisions and sort of working memory. So suddenly you can still remember everyone and things, but you have a little trouble doing your job that you've been doing for 40 years, right? So things like that.
People sometimes have the misperception, I think, about what the kind of life you can live once you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. You can still have a pretty good quality of life. It's not a death sentence.
No, absolutely not. And there are studies also we talked about, so some of the risk factors that we can go into more detail are, basically what I always say is what's good for your brain is good for your heart, right? And so that, sort of my, the cocktail party response when people ask about this, right, is like, well, keep your blood pressure normal as well as you can, and keep your blood sugar normal as well as you can, because that's protecting all those blood vessels in your brain that are supporting all those neurons that are in your brain, right? And so, in addition to controlling your medications like that, there's diet and exercise, right? And then also, in addition to things that keep your heart and those brain vessels healthy, there's cognitive, but just sort of continuing to try to learn things, and that becomes more difficult as your memory and thinking problems, progress.
Yes.
Right. But you can still have a good quality of life, and I think what's important about that is having a good support system, being able to stay socially engaged, right? Even if, say, you can't really do, crossword puzzles anymore, right? You can still maybe sit around and, in your good moments, sort of reminisce about things, right?
Yes.
So, it's important for the care partners and family members to understand that at some point they won't be recognized anymore, right? But not to take it personally, right?
You mentioned some of the factors, and there are early stages that earlier on that there's the tendencies for whatever the cells are there for dementia. It can't be detected earlier on, you were saying, but are we making progress in that? And if you can find out, like, whether it's genetics or whatever, if you can find out that someone has the propensity for or the tendency to become an Alzheimer.
Right. So there is one main genetic risk factor. So there are a couple of gene mutations that you can get that actually are they call hereditary Alzheimer's disease. So so some of these, so in other words, if you have this gene mutation, you basically will get the disease, and it'll actually occur in an earlier stage. But that's actually pretty rare.
Okay.
Okay, probably 3%, something like that. But the vast majority of cases just arise from what we call a sporadic etiology. So we're not really sure. It's a combination of things,
So it's not genetics.
like genes and just things that have occurred. You've accumulated over 6, 7, 8 decades, right? A lot goes on during that time, right? Yeah. So there is a main genetic risk factor, and it can be tested for, and it's called the ApoE gene. And there's a particular subtype of this gene called the ApoE4, and that tends to predispose people to Alzheimer's disease. And that's actually helpful for research because now we can study, okay, what does that gene do, right? What pathways are it involved in? And a lot of them turn out to be related to vascular health as well. But as far as diagnosis, and I mentioned that the disease, we think it starts, maybe decades before symptoms, and it's like anything, right? So like with you'd rather catch cancer in stage 1 than stage 4, right? Just like that. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we catch people as early as possible? And so we have now imaging PET scans, and so and I think most folks, hopefully at home, have heard just in the popular press that the two main pathologies for Alzheimer's disease are those plaques and the tangles, right? And without going into too much detail about that, and they now have these PET scans that can detect the plaques and the tangles in you, and while you're just sitting there alive, right?
Wow.
And so. But the problem with that, of course, is that it's expensive and it's real specialized. You need to be at a major medical center that's going to be able to do those scans. So the FDA actually just approved of a blood test, and it's called the Illumipulse. Okay, and so the importance of this is if you have concerns about what's going on with yourself or your loved one, you can go and maybe request this test, right? And so what this test, it actually measures the amounts of the proteins that are involved in the amyloid, in the plaques and the tangles. And what they showed was that a positive blood test in the clinical trials meant that like 92% of the time a positive drug test meant that you had positive plaque PET scans for the plaques in your brains, right? But the other important thing is that 97% of the time, if you had a negative test, you would be negative for those plaques building up in your brain. So it can also kind of rule out maybe that you have Alzheimer's disease. And so that would help a doctor say, well, you may not have Alzheimer's disease. It could be, again, if it's a sudden onset, it may be more vascular, but sometimes it's just, you have a new medication and they're just mixing wrong and it's just creating confusion. Right. And so
when you find out early, is there a treatment that does it? Can you prevent it from maturing?
So prevention's obviously the goal, and I think honestly we're still sort of a ways off on that one. So right now the goal is to try and slow things down, right? Once it's detected. And so there are now 2 FDA approved, so our sort of old line of medications, these so-called cholinesterase inhibitors like Aricept, or some of the others, Namenda is another one that people take. Those just go after symptoms. So they're like symptomatic treatments, but a lot of times they have really bad side effects for your belly and things like that. And so they're not well tolerated. But these new drugs are actually immunotherapies that are designed to get rid of those plaques that build up in your brain. Okay, and 2 of them have been FDA approved. Well, 3 have been FDA approved, but 1 was taken off the market because the side effects were too great, and I think the clinicians just didn't think it was worth the risk. And that's always the thing, right? You want the most benefit for the least amount of side effects, right? And so these, in the clinical trials, one is called, and you should probably be seeing these on TV soon, if not, if you haven't already, but one is called lecanemab, which is the trade name is Leqembi. And in the clinical trials, they showed that there was over about an 18-month period, there was a 27% slowing of cognitive decline in the people that were taking the drug versus the placebo. And so, that's not...
It's hopeful.
It's helpful, right?
Hopeful.
Helpful and hopeful. It's not like the high impact, effect that we're really going for, but it's a start. And so these amyloid immunotherapies, and by immunotherapy we mean it's an infusion, right? So they have these custom antibodies that go into your brain and attack these plaques and get rid of them. And that seems to improve symptoms. And then the other one is called donanemab, and its trade name is Kisunla. So whoever comes up with these names, right? And that one actually, over an 18-month period, showed a 35% improvement or slowing of cognitive decline. So again, a little bit better. They still had the same potential side effects, and the main side effects are brain swelling and brain bleeds, which is pretty significant, right? But it's only like maybe but it's like 20% or so of the patients. But what they'll do is they'll monitor you with like an MRI or whatever, which is relatively inexpensive and usually covered by healthcare plans, and so they can sort of monitor to make sure you're not having those sort of silent symptoms, right?
Are you hopeful that in your lifetime there'll be a cure?
I'm sort of running out of time for me, right? Yeah. So, so cure maybe not, and of course you always want to say yes. But the reality, and what I've understood over doing this for 30 years, is that the advance of science is slow. We're about 50 years behind cancer research as far as a real push to understand what's going on with the disease, right? And so, and so we're still having trouble, fighting cancer, right? And so it may not be a cure, but I think these sort of multimodal efforts to slow things down. And so
Yeah.
I mentioned just these 2 FDA-approved drugs. There are also many drugs sort of in the pipeline, right? And so some of these drugs are targeting the tangles that are in your brain. In fact, the FDA just fast-tracked one of these drugs. It's in a phase 2 clinical trial, which means it's a smaller scale trial, and they're just trying to figure out the right dose and make sure it does have a benefit. But they're trying to fast-track it, so if it does look like very promising, they can recruit and start a phase 3 trial as fast as possible, so then it could come to market faster. And then there are other drugs that we call, again, these disease-modifying drugs, so slowing things down, right? No intention necessarily of stopping it, just trying to be realistic. Right, but then they're targeting other aspects like inflammation that occurs in the brain and different stress responses that occur in the brain, and just keeping all those connections in the brain, talking to each other efficiently. They're drugs sort of designed to sort of boost those brain functions.
What are some of the early signs of dementia?
Yeah, so I mentioned that with Alzheimer's disease, and we can just talk about that, I guess, mainly since that's the main cause, right? Again, it's a short-term memory deficit at first, right?
But what does that look like when you say short-term memory? How do you recognize it?
So it would be, for instance, it would be like just not remembering things that just happened to you, right? Or asking the same question about the same thing over and over again, like where are we going again? And you've heard the answer, but you can't just lay that memory down. Or just repeating the same story, right, over and over again. And so that might be a good segue into like what's normal and what's a concern, right? So, like my daughter would say, you've told me that story 100 times, right? But we get older and we have these things that were funny or poignant in our life, and you forget some along the way, and you tend to start focusing on the same stories, and that's just see, I think that's just normal, right? Yeah, but when you're just saying the same thing over and over again, and it's not necessarily important or something, so
someone once said that if you go downstairs and you can't remember what you went downstairs for, that's one thing, but if you go downstairs and you don't know where you are, that's concerning.
So that would be the next one I would come up with. Walking in the room and why were you there? Why am I here? That happens all the time, right? But usually you can go after a while. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I came down to do that, right? But the difference would be someone just walking around the house and not knowing why they're there, where they are, that sort of thing. Sort of wandering, I guess you would say. Another one would be word finding. Right, so a lot of times there's this great vocabulary word we used to use all the time, and now we can't find it. Or it's an acquaintance, like I knew this person when our kids played sports together, and now I'll see them in the grocery store. It's like, oh gosh, who was that? That's normal, right? But what would be abnormal would be not being able to name something that's very commonplace in your life, right? Something that you use every day, or a person that's close to you, like a friend. And of course, once you get to family members, it's obviously a little more serious. And I think the last one I would mention would be losing your train of thought, which I'm sure I'll do at some point in this interview, right? And I think that's normal, but what would be abnormal would be just not being able to really carry on a conversation because you just can't keep track of what's going on, right? And so I think those are some of the early signs. And then there's activities of daily living, right? So, these are things that you've been doing sort of automatically, since you were a teenager or a young adult. Working household appliances, shopping, cooking, your morning care routine, things like that. So most of us can do that automatically, and don't. And if we can do that, then I think we're still okay, right? But it's when you kind of forget how to do some of those things.
We have about a minute left. So if people are witnessing any of these signs, what should they do? What would you suggest the first step of course of action for them?
Yeah, I would say the first thing would be to go to see your doctor, right? Maybe ask for one of these blood tests, right? There are community resources. The AARP, along with the Alzheimer's Center the Alzheimer's Association, has a community resource finder, and I think it's at the AARP website, and it's also at a website for the Michigan Dementia Coalition, which is a the statewide group of concerned people that are sort of coming together to advise the state on how to make Michigan a dementia-capable state.
Yes.
And then there's the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center that involves researchers from Michigan and MSU and Wayne State, so it's a statewide effort.
Thank you. So please get help, know you're not alone, and make certain that you check out those resources. Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome.
It's been said that one day either you will be a caregiver or you will need a caregiver. Jason, how does AARP Michigan help individuals who are caregivers navigate through very complex issues?
Thank you, Paula. There are a variety of complex issues that caregivers face, whether it's legal planning, medical management, financial planning for an older adult. AARP helps in several different ways for these very complicated issues. AARP Michigan specifically has a state resource guide. This guide is available to AARP members and non-members so that they can find the services and supports within their community that can help them navigate those pieces.
And so if people have a question about a legal issue or medical power of attorney or something like that, what should they do?
Well, the first step is always to visit AARP's website. We have tons of articles from legal experts, medical professionals to talk through some of those frequently asked questions. You can also call the 211 program. AARP has partnered with United Way, who manages 211, similar to 911, but you call 211 instead. And you're able to connect with those ultra-local resources in your community, things like attorneys, caregiving resources, respite care programs, which are really critical for caregivers as they navigate these challenges, which can be very stressful.
And one of the things we want to do is encourage the caregiver to also take care of themselves while they're taking care of others. We find that that's also an issue a lot of times, right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you so much, Jason. We appreciate all that you're doing to help caregivers in the state of Michigan.
I'm Tracy Anderson with Impart Alliance at Michigan State University. Today I'm here with Jennifer Digman from Mount Pleasant. We're here to talk about direct care and the impact that it has on your life. Tell me about direct care and what it means to you, Jennifer.
It means so very much because my disease, multiple sclerosis, has made it possible for me not to walk. I'm having trouble with my hands, and that's the variability of multiple sclerosis, but direct care workers, they can come into my house, and depending what my needs are that day, they can help with everything from going to the grocery store or helping me. For heaven's sakes, Jen will take me to the post office so that I can mail letters, and if I need to go somewhere, that they can help, Jen can help with that. Or little things like cooking dinner so that Dan can have meals when he's done working, because my husband also lives with multiple sclerosis. And Jen not only cares for me, but she can help by making my life easier. It helps Dan so his day-to-day existence is better. And direct care does that.
And direct care allows you to stay in your home, which everybody deserves.
Everyone deserves that, and everybody knows that waking up in your own bed and living your own home, it really makes your life so much more rewarding and fulfilling, and the way it should be.
Absolutely. Thank you. To learn more about Impart Alliance and our advocacy around direct care, please visit our website at impartalliance.msu.edu.
No one is immune from fraudsters. If you are a victim of a scam or an attempted scam, Brenda, what should someone do?
The first thing you should do is notify your local authorities. Even if it did not happen, You want the local authorities to be aware that these types of scams are happening in your community so they can be on top of it. And then we ask you to notify AARP's Fraud Watch Network, because we track scams by zip codes so that we can also alert our audiences that this is happening in a particular community.
I love that. People don't understand. They can type in their zip code and find out what scams are going on in their neighborhood. And people can do that by accessing
our Fraud Watch Network. Just call the number.
To call the number and or go on the website
or
as
go
well,
online
and type in your zip code. And if someone is doing a scam like replacing your windows in that neighborhood and it's going around, it's right there. And the Attorney General office also is another resource.
Yes,
correct?
You want to make sure the local authorities know what's going on.
And do you know what some of the top scams are?
Yeah, the top scams are imposter scams. Sweepstakes scams still exist. They're old as dawn, but sweepstakes scams are still out there, and crypto scams are out there. Those financial scams are out there.
How can you tell what's real and what's not real?
You don't have to tell. If it doesn't feel good and doesn't smell right, somebody's offering you something for nothing, just hang up the phone. Just disconnect from the email.
You know, we used to say if it sounds too good to be true,
it's not true.
It's not true.
That's
so we
right.
want to make certain
That's right.
people protect themselves and don't be in such a hurry to respond. So make certain that people protect themselves and call or verify. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you.
Thinking about dental implants, 3 things you should think about: time, cost, and comfort. Talk to us about those 3 things, Dr. Winters.
I'm glad you mentioned that and brought that up, because it's a very important and I think a very valuable thing to learn about where we've come now in this procedure. So at this point, with the aid of special x-rays, which we call CAT scans or CBCT scans, and with computer and digital assistance, we can accelerate this process of rehabilitating a person who's lost their teeth to basically, in literally one day, start with a person coming in for an appointment that maybe has bad teeth that can't be saved, that we can place implants, digitally create a new set of teeth for them, place those teeth, and be able to accomplish that in one session or in one day.
Wow.
Now, the attraction to that, of course, is time is always important to everyone. And sometimes these can be lengthy procedures when you have to, wait for things to heal and things like that. And people don't want to have, people are into instant gratification.
Right, absolutely.
We know that, and that accomplishes that. It can be safely done now with the assistance of computers, that comfort-wise people can do this and tolerate this procedure just fine.
Wow.
And that, of course, when you save that kind of time, that's also an expense or money for the person. When you save time, that's a savings for the person as well.
And you can't put a price on the quality of life, on your smile,
Right.
on your confidence as you go
That's
out.
right.
I mean, you spend money on your cell phone, you spend money on,
there's a huge psychological component to somebody who's missing their teeth, their appearance, their function, their social interactions. And this is the huge benefit, to this procedure. And now that we can do it quicker, that's even better.
That's incredible. Just thank you for all that you've done to make people smile again.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Real Possibilities. And just remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there to help you no matter what your situation or concerns are. Check out the resources, news you can use. Thanks for watching Real Possibilities.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.